Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel, and it's been a very interesting last 2 weeks as there's been tons of news. There's been the overthrowing of Maduro, there's been the swearing in of Madani, there's been the daycare fraud in Somalia. But just over the last 9 days, there's been a even bigger story that I think is more important than a lot of those things, and that is the protests in Iran. There's been a lot of protests over the last 9 days in Iran, and it might actually result in the downfall of the regime. Now, for a little bit of context on this protest in Iran, it's over multiple issues, but it's mainly over the economy. And there's two facets of it that have been related to the economy here. There's the inflation part, and then there's the water part. And both of them have been severely mismanaged by the Iranian regime. In fact, it's been horribly mismanaged. This resulted in many issues. First is inflation. Here's the inflation rate. It's nearly 50%, and it's increased from a lot from earlier in the year, which was only around 30% last at the start of the year. So it's around a 20-point increase, and this is causing a lot of concern among the people there, as even 30% is incredibly high, but shooting up another 50% basically to 50% basically erodes everyone's savings, and it massively increases the cost of goods for people living in Iran. This is causing a lot of issues for the people there. And whenever you have things like inflation and economic uncertainty and strife for resources like food, you'll skip protests. You saw this in the French Revolution. You see it pretty much in every revolution out there. When the economy is not doing well and people aren't able to get what they need, they're more likely to protest and revolt. And that is especially true when it's economic mismanagement, and mismanagement that is clearly shown by the regime, as there's been a ton of mismanagement there. And in terms of government spending, Iran is mainly spending on military and not the people's needs. So they see it as a lot of mismanagement in terms of that. And then the water part, which is absolutely the most egregious part of the Iranian regime here, is that they've been ruining their water resources, and it's drying up there. Iran is looking to relocate the nation's capital because of the severe water shortages that make Tehran unsustainable. And this is mainly due to mismanagement. And it's clearly mismanagement. As experts say, the crisis was caused by years of ill-conceived dam projects and overpumping that destroyed centuries-old systems for tapping underground reserves. And this mismanagement, both on the dam side, which has been horrible, as they actually built a dam on a river right next to an area where there was a lot of salt, and that salt, because of the dam, that the salt eventually ended up getting into the water and making it saline, which means it's salt water. In fact, it's pretty much as salty as the ocean. That means you can't drink it. So that's the dam part's been absolutely egregious, and then the overpumping has been related to high spending on water-intensive industries like rice. They wanted to make them self-sustainable in terms of food, but they did it in a way that was clearly bad, with rice being a heavily intensive water crop. That means that they have to use a lot of water for that, and that's overpumping that. Additionally, they've been doing crypto mining. Takes also a lot of water. They've also been doing AI. A lot of those hardware intensive industries like that take a lot of water. That means that results in a lot of that water being pumped out when they need to actually save that water for actual people, like drinking it, and more important industries that are better used. So this water is also playing into the protests there. So all these factors there, along with also the social related issues But that's not the main issue here for the protest. But all those issues compounding up resulted in this protest. And this is causing a massive issue for the regime. As previously what they've done to stop protest was, one, do concessions, and two is military action and suppression of the protests. But that won't happen this time. Simply because, one, a lot of these are economic issues, which those issues they can't really do concessions with, as it's due to their own mismanagement, and they can't just say, we're going to be less strict on the religious stuff, or religious repression. So, that means that there's going to be, they can't just do a quick fix in terms of concession. Additionally, they can't really do, their military is incredibly weak too. As the 12 Days War with Israel destroyed a lot of their military and also killed a lot of their top military officials too. So a lot of their military is in disarray, and it's not functioning at the strength that it used to be. And then the U.S. bombed their nuclear program, so they can't use that either. Of course, they did not use it on their own people, but it shows the weakness of the Iranian regime. They can't really do military stuff either. And if they did, it's going to be a lot weaker than what they did before. So, it's resulting in Iran having a hard time putting it down. Putting this protest down. And that makes it a existential threat to the regime. As it's not just, it's not a small protest, it's massive. And it's in pretty much every city in Iran. Particularly the more populated areas, which is the area where you see all these cities right here. And it's causing there to be a lot of, and due to the fact that it's widespread, you can't really put down a protest like this when it's across the entire country. You can't really do it as much with the military. You need a stronger military force. So it's causing issues and it's causing problems for the regime. Additionally, the protest isn't just a peaceful one. Let's get that clear. It's not just a peaceful protest. It's actually a pretty violent protest that's actually threatening the military. As if you look here, the regime is in chaos. As new videos show, protesters reportedly ripping down the gate of a government building in South Iran. Universities and government officials closed under a government-ordered shutdown amid protest caused by growing political and economic crisis. So they're tearing down government. They're going into government buildings. They're actively resisting the military. Additionally, they're actually torching government buildings. They're not just breaking in, but they're actually torching them. New video shows Iran protests torching government building in Tehran. This is the capital. And this is usually where they have the most military support and the most military control. The fact that even in their own capital city, where there is all that military control, government buildings are being attacked and destroyed, is showing signs of weakness among the regime and the military there. Additionally, it's not just in Tehran, it's across the country. It's Islamist regime's government headquarters in Nezres County, Fars province, have fallen into the hands of anti-Islamist regime or I don't know how to pronounce the name, so I'll just tell you who he is. Prince of the former Iranian state. Former Iranian state that was overthrown when the when the regime came into power. And basically all those protests, all these groups are basically anti-current regime and pro previous monarchy in from 1979 in the 1970s. So these protests are getting violent to the point where they're being an active military threat to the supreme leader's power. In fact, a lot of the police members are actually joining the protest because they also face a lot of the economic issues that were stated before, which are water and the high rates of inflation. So they're not going to try to be loyal when they're also facing a lot of the protesters' same problems. So this protest looks like it is a very, very, very extreme threat to the Iranian regime, and it might actually topple the regime there. In fact, Polymarket is showing a large increase in the chance of the leader being ousted by the end of the year, as now it's jumped from around 20 to 30% to now almost 50. Now it's not quite over 50%, but still that jump shows a large amount of sentiment towards large amount of sentiment and belief that the Iranian regime will fall, and there will be a new one in place. So there's a lot of sentiment there, but there's a large amount of sentiment for the regime to fall, and this will probably continue. Now, the only way that I see this protest to be put down is maybe military power. But as I mentioned earlier, military power is weakened in Iran, and it's causing there to be a lot of issues with trying to put it down that way. They can't really put it down that way. There's also another hurdle with this, and that is a tweet by Trump. If this is from Donald Trump early on January, on the 2nd of January. It said, if Iran shoots and violently kills peaceful protesters, which is their custom, United States of America will come to their rescue. We are locked and loaded and ready to go. Thank you for their attention to this matter. President Donald J. Trump. So this is another threat to the Iranian regime in terms of putting down this protest. Because we've already seen the capabilities of the U.S. in terms of taking down targets. You saw this with Maduro, just recently, with Maduro being captured by Donald Trump in his capital, and without any U.S. losses. So you also saw this with the bombing of the Iranian nuclear facilities. You've seen it with the killing from Israel of all of these of all their top military leaders in the 12 Days War. So the U.S. clearly has a way to kill a lot of these people and actually target the leaders. So additionally, Trump has been shown that he's not bluffing, as again he just took Maduro out of Venezuela. So this threat by Donald Trump is actually a major threat in terms of this, in terms of trying to take down, in terms of not using military. Because if they do try to use the military, it's very likely that that the U.S. will try to take out their leadership and try to bomb top military leaders, and maybe even take down the supreme leader himself. This and also if they do shoot at the protesters and try to use force to take the protest down, that might also not entirely work. As historically, when there's been these protests that were violently suppressed, you saw this with the shooting that ended up resulting in the Russian Revolution, and the pretty much ousting of Tsar Nicholas and the concessions that he had to make there. You see it there, where they shot and killed a whole bunch of protesters. That just resulted in more protests. So that might not actually work too. But it especially won't work if Trump actually went in and take out the military leaders. Because at that point, the people would actually be able to stand up properly to the Iranian regime. Now, the Iranian regime has not been following this at all. They have been killing peaceful protesters. As there's been 3 children dead in Iran protests as security forces accused of indiscriminate targeting. Escalating protests sparked by economic chaos have seen at least 20 people killed and nearly 1,000 arrested, say human rights groups. So, the fact that there are children dead Now, those children could actually be were people that were violent, but that's unlikely, depending on how young the children were. So, Iran has probably not really been following this. And you've seen it with actual military suppression of it, too. Even though it's very weak suppression, there have been security forces that have fired into crowds. Although it's not, although they tend to be more violent crowds, they have been crowds. So Iran hasn't really been following this at all. So Trump might actually do this. In fact, I think he really should. Now, how do I think he'll do this? First, decapitating military and military assets and military leadership. Maybe even killing the supreme leader himself. Because that would be an easy way. Then another way you could do it is funnel weapons and tech into the nation itself, and funnel the weapons into protesters' hands. Because then that means then the weapons protesters, if the protesters had weapons, that means they're more likely to be able to fight back. So those are multiple ways. And I actually hope he does this. And it's been shown to he's been shown not to be bluffing in the past. As again, the taking down of nuclear facilities in Iran, the Maduro the taking of Maduro from Venezuela, the Venezuelan capital in the middle of the night. So it's clearly been shown that he's capable of doing this. Also, I think also Israel could help with this too. As you know, they're clearly anti the Iranian regime in a lot of ways. So maybe you could ask Israel and Mossad to go in and take out a lot of military leadership there too. You could do that too. Although I think honestly, the Iranian Israel intelligence has already done that in a lot of ways. They might be able to even make. They could even take it even further too. Hopefully, those might be many ways. And I actually hope he does that, because then Iran is a major military antagonist to the U.S. as it's funds terrorists like Hamas, Hezbollah, Houthis that are not just attacking Israel, even though that's been a complaint by a lot of people that it's all pro-Israel, but they also attack U.S. assets, as there's been reports of Hamas, Hezbollah in Venezuela, and then Houthis just harass shipping of any nation, U.S. nation, in the Red Sea. So, it would be incredibly good for the elimination of terrorist assets in Iran if we actually had the regime overthrown. Additionally, they have a ton of oil. They're a major oil state. They don't have as much as Venezuela. They still got a lot of oil. So, if you actually have a regime that's more anti-U.S. instead of pro-Russia, pro-China, more pro-U.S., and you have a power like that, that means that there's more oil less oil going to both China and Russia, more oil on the open market, resulting in lower oil prices and more strategic advantage for the U.S. Additionally, with Iran gone, there's practically no with a pro-U.S. regime in Iran, there's basically no anti-U.S. States in the Middle East anymore. Very few. Of course, there's still, at least there's no major powers in there anymore. So that means that the U.S. has practically secured the Middle East. And that's incredibly good because, again, that's the area with the largest oil reserve in the world. Areas with the largest oil reserves in the world. So awesome if the U.S. if that was successful. So honestly, I do hope that Trump at least helps the protesters in some way. It also could be the fact that he might also smuggle in a whole bunch more Starlink satellites, as that could also result in more communication between the protesters and less suppression, as Iran has historically been able to shut down the internet within the state there. So that makes it because and with sorry, and because of his Iran has been historically been able to shut down the internet, having a major internet provider like Starlink accessible within Iran limits the capability of Iran to actually shut down the internet and allows more communication between the protesters, which makes it more likely for them to be able to fight back against the regime and take it over. So this is really good. And there's actual signs that the leadership there is incredibly afraid and might actually leave as the leader will flee Iran for Moscow if protests overwhelm security forces, say intelligence report. So there's already been plans from the leader of Iran to leave the country for Moscow. And it shows that he's afraid. That he's scared that protesters will actually achieve an overthrowing of the government. As there's nothing he can really do. So, additionally, he said, in this statement, he said, if protests overwhelm security forces, that's another thing. If the U.S. gives weapons to the protesters, more likely to, that means if they give weapons to the protesters, that results in a higher chance that the protesters will be able to overthrow the security forces, which would be great. Additionally, as I mentioned earlier, decapitating the military, taking out certain leaders would also do that again. Again, Starlink sending in more satellites would do that. So, I think the U.S. should take a whole bunch of actions in Iran to suppress, to support the protests and suppress the military of Iran. That would benefit the protests in a lot of ways and result in a higher chance of the U.S. overthrowing the Iranian regime and replacing it with a more pro-U.S., pro-liberty, anti-terrorism group. And I think this will actually be successful. I think there's a high chance of this continuing. Hopefully it does, because the people there have been facing issues after issues after issues and suppression after suppression after suppression. And if this is successful, it benefits the U.S. in tons of ways. And it secures the Middle East. It takes out a major brick player, too. As Iran is one of the players in BRICS. It takes out the oil base of China, or limits it, even though it has Russia's oil base still there. Secures another major energy area for the U.S. That's in combination with already the Venezuela. So already the U.S. is already gaining a whole bunch of, more likely to gain a whole bunch of oil from both Venezuela and now Iran. So if that just adds up all, makes it so if Iran actually goes pro-U.S. and more anti Russia, China, that would be great. It would practically secure oil for the U.S. and secure the energy of almost every state. The only major oil producer that would be pro-China and Russia anymore would be Russia itself. And they're already facing problems. So, with that, with the overthrowing, and the possible overthrowing, and both Venezuela and Iran, the U.S. is in a prime state in the energy market now. In fact, at that point, you could actually even put sanctions on. You could ask if all these Saudi Arabia and U.S. gets control of Iran, Venezuela, and makes it not control, but if they become U.S. allies, you can also ask them to possibly put sanctions on China and limit trade of oil there. That would actually starve out China too, as China already is faces energy issues. So that could benefit them too. benefit the U.S. in that way too. So overall, I think this is a great thing for for the U.S. that this protest is happening, and hopefully it's successful. As it's going to benefit the U.S. in many ways. But anyway, thanks to everyone for listening. Share this with anyone you know, and I'll see you next time.